Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is double Parsha Behar-Bechukotai, Tavshin Pei Gimel. And tonight we're going to be continuing from what we discussed on Tuesday night. And because our good friend Arkady is back, therefore we'll have a better review than we would have had if he had not yet come back from Israel. So welcome back, Arkady.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will start from Pasuk Chafhei, Perek Chafhei, Pasuk Lamed Hey, chapter 25, verse 35. If your brother shall become impoverished, and his hand will be slipping with you, you shall strengthen him, and he shall live with you. So Rashi explains that this mitzvah is talking about where you have someone who is starting to fall. He has not become impoverished to the point that he needs to ask people for financial assistance, but he's on the brink. So the mitzvah says, strengthen him. Help him before he falls, before he actually becomes impoverished. Help him avoid that. Help him in a way that he avoids that situation. Because as Rashi says, if you fall, it's harder to pick you up. If you haven't fallen yet, it's easier to keep a person from falling. Once he's fallen, it takes more work to pick them up. The same idea financially. Before they financially fall, strengthen them so that doesn't happen, because once it happens, it's harder to deal with. So this pasuk really is the highest form of tzedakah. Rambam Maimonides, in the laws of gifts to the poor, he enumerates 8 levels of tzedakah. What are from highest to lowest? And the highest level that the Rambam talks about, the highest level of tzedakah is to give a person support, to help a person be financially stable, to give them the ability that they could, again, take care of themselves. They could support themselves, either by giving him a gift, finding him a job, bringing him in as a partner, lending him money, whatever the example may be. If what you're doing to him is you are helping him get back on his feet, then that is the highest form of tzedakah. Now, as we mentioned Tuesday, this mitzvah of this idea of helping him be financially able to support himself, again, the way the Torah, the way Rashi spells it out, the way the Rambam spells it out, is to prevent him from falling. Before he's teetering, he's on the brink, and you help him and you prevent him from becoming needy to others by giving him some kind of either a gift, a loan, finding him a job. That's the highest level of tzedakah. But the truth is that if the situation is chas v'shalom, that the person has already fallen to the situation of poverty, and you're able to lift them up to get out of poverty, that clearly is also included in this pasuk and this higher level of tzedakah. True, if he already has fallen into poverty, he already needs to ask people for assistance. It's harder to get him back up. But at the same time, if you do get him back up, then you have fulfilled this higher level of tzedakah, and maybe in some ways even higher, because of the fact that he's already impoverished. You've helped him come out of that poverty, that he can be self-sufficient. So that's the highest level of tzedakah. Now, I'm going to quickly review the other levels of tzedakah. And that is, the second level is that, the second level of tzedakah, one lower than helping him become self-sufficient, is where, again, you're not helping him become self-sufficient. You're giving him tzedakah, you're giving him charity. The next level is to be able to give the tzedakah in a way that you don't know who is the recipient, and the recipient doesn't know it's you. That is the way that the mitzvah is done in its sincerest fashion. You don't in any way see that person as obligated to you because you don't know who it is. That person doesn't feel obligated or feel embarrassed from you because he doesn't know who you are. That is the second level. The next level, again, it's in descending order. The next level is where the giver knows who he's giving to, but the recipient doesn't know who he's getting from. At least in that situation, the recipient is not going to feel the embarrassment if he meets up with you. The next level, again, one notch down, is where the poor man knows who he is getting from, but the giver doesn't know who he's giving it to. There have been situations, the Talmud talks about people who used to basically put money in the back on their backs or in the back of their coat, and they would walk amongst the poor, and they didn't see who actually, and they were purposely walking away that people could come up and they don't see them and they take. So the poor people who took understood where they're getting from, and that creates a certain level of embarrassment. But at the same time, it's less because of the fact that the giver doesn't know who he's giving it to, and therefore it's not as embarrassing to the poor man. Okay, the next level is where both you have, one second. Right. The next level is where they both know the giver knows who's getting it, the recipient knows who's giving it, but at least you give it to him before he asks. The next level is where you give it to him after he asks. The next level is that you're giving him after he asks, and maybe not even giving him enough to support himself, but you give it to him with a smile, with a cheerful expression. And the final level is where you give it to him without showing a cheerful expression. Deep down, you may not be happy about doing it, but at least you don't go ahead and show it to him. So those are the quick review of the 8 levels of tzedakah. We're good? Follow that? Okay, now, what I would like to focus on tonight is a theme that I think comes out from these 8 levels of the Rambam and from other sources of the Rambam that we did mention. I believe we mentioned Monday night. I believe we mentioned Tuesday night. But if so, it's going to be worthwhile reviewing because of the point we want to make. And that is that the theme of tonight's Drasha is that when performing this mitzvah of tzedakah, it's not enough just to go ahead and give money. But rather, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it. It's not just about handing money over. There's thought, a lot of thought that has to go into what you're doing. From the Rambam's levels of tzedakah, it's very clear that the thought that some of the thought that you have to put into tzedakah is to do it in a way that is less embarrassing to him. We're supposed to be sensitive to the poor man's feelings, and therefore the less embarrassing or uncomfortable it is for the poor person receiving, the better it is. And as we see, so that's number one. Number two, the Rambam writes before he gets into the 8 levels, the Rambam talks about basically how you have to emotionally support the poor man. Not just to go in and give him the money, but to actually show him emotional support. So, for instance, the Rambam says that when a person gives tzedakah, and he gives tzedakah with where he shows the needy person that he's not happy that he's giving him the money, the Rambam says you lose the mitzvah, you lose the merit. And then he writes, but rather you should give it to him with a cheerful expression, and basically you should empathize with him over his suffering. You should feel the suffering with him, and you should show him that. You should show that you feel his pain. And you speak to him words of comfort, of solace. It's very clear. It's not just about giving the money, but of emotional support. The next halach in the Rambam writes, let's say that poor man comes to you and you have no money. So what do you do then? If you have no money to give him, you at least, it says, paiseo b'devarim, you at least speak to him nicely. You appease him. You make him feel good. You try to encourage him. Even though you don't have the money to give him, but at least you give him that moral support. Give him that emotional support. Okay? So we see from the Rambam that, again, it's not just about giving the money. It's about putting the thought into not just giving him money, not just financially supporting him, but emotionally supporting him. That is a very important part. And I'd like to share with you a very beautiful story that illustrates this. But first, before we do that, I want to review again something we spoke about Tuesday night regarding the highest level of tzedakah, which was helping a person become self-sufficient. So we mentioned that number one, even if, let's say, the mitzvah is to prevent him from becoming needy, to have to come on to ask others, but if it doesn't work out, if he actually does fall into poverty. But if you, again, help him become self-supportive, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Chazakta Bai, the pasuk that we just read, to strengthen him, to make him self-sufficient. So I'm going to read to you here from a book called The Laws of Tzedakah and Meiser, and they write like this. Similarly, purchasing an item from an indigent is considered to be in this category. You have a poor man, and he's selling things, and you buy his stuff. So what are you doing when you do that? Are you raising him out of poverty? Not necessarily, but you're clearly making him be able to help himself to some degree. So buying things, now you may need this thing, you're buying it for yourself, but by buying it from him, you are actually helping him support himself. You fulfill this mitzvah chazakta of strengthening him. The mitzvah chazakta, he writes here, not only applies to one who helps someone who is lacking, it even applies to one who is not lacking, and you support him by ensuring his parnasa through your patronage. That means, think about it. You go to a store. So what they're saying here is, if you go to a store, you have a person, he has a store, he's making a living, he's not in need. But at the end of the day, what keeps him being able to be self-sufficient? His customers, right? It's the customers helping be self-sufficient. So by you going ahead and purchasing from this man, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of chazakta. You're fulfilling the mitzvah of helping a person be self-sufficient, because that's what makes him be self-sufficient. His customers, which would mean that if you know a fellow Jew is selling something, there's more than one reason, more than one explanation, or more than one reason that it's best that if you can, you should make the purchase from him. But besides the fact that there is a halach about helping a fellow Jew in where you buy from, this is a very interesting idea that you could actually be fulfilling the mitzvah of chazakta, the mitzvah of helping a Jew be self-sufficient, because of the fact that you're his customer. It's his customers help me self-sufficient, and you're that customer. Now, I would understand this to mean that, again, my understanding is that, if Amazon was owned by a Jew and you're ordering from Amazon, right? You're not helping him be self-sufficient. They got plenty of money. They don't need your purchase. If they decided to close up shop and not to sell anything anymore, okay, maybe I'm overdoing it with Amazon. But, imagine a person who's got a very, very, he's wealthy. He's got a great business going for him, right? And he's got plenty of money in the bank. And anybody buying from him right now is making him wealthier. Not making him self-sufficient, making him wealthier. Maybe that's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about a person who runs a business, and his bread and butter comes from his customers. That is where he gets that is how he's able to be self-sufficient from his customers. And you're one of those customers. You have fulfilled the mitzvah of chazakta. You've done the mitzvah of helping a fellow Jew be self-sufficient. So we've got the idea of buying from a needy person fulfills this mitzvah of chazakta of helping somebody be self-sufficient, the highest level of tzedakah. And even if a person is not needy, but you're helping them be self-sufficient by patronizing them, then you've got this mitzvah too. And the last thing I'm going to mention, what they write here, is one also fulfills this level by allowing the poor person to pay back a loan little at a time. You lend this needy person money, and instead of having him forcing him or putting it on him to pay back in one shot, which if he doesn't have enough money, what does that mean? He's going to have to borrow more money in order to help you. After he pays you, he's going to have to borrow more money. So what do? You go ahead and you tell him to pay little at a time. And that prevents him from having to borrow more money. That also is a fulfillment of this mitzvah of chazakta of strengthening him. Again, you may not be solving his whole problem, but again, you're helping him be more self-sufficient because he doesn't need to borrow anymore. If you let him pay back a bit of a time, which helps him not have to borrow further, that's helping him be more self-sufficient, and therefore, that is the fulfillment of this mitzvah of chazakta. Okay, so now, the story I want to share with you relates to what we just said, that if you purchase something from a poor person, that falls into this category of a chazakta, of helping a person be self-sufficient. And my understanding is that even if you don't necessarily pull him out of poverty, you don't make him completely self-sufficient, but as much as you help him be self-sufficient, you're fulfilling this level of tzedakah. So the story that I want to share with you comes from the book called The Tzedakah Treasury, written by Rabbi Avram Chaim Foyer. He should be well. And he brings down the following beautiful story. The story takes place like this. There was a person in the city of Prague. His name was Reb Meshaya Muscat. He was a big Baal Tzedakah. And the story goes, he also developed unusual sensitivity for the real needs of the poor. Once, a blind pauper came to Prague and made an effort to support himself by selling cakes and cookies. The blind man set up his humble business right next to the home of Rabbi Yeshaya, where he sat all day with a basket full of baked goods and hawked his wares to every passerby. The blind man's situation was miserable indeed because he sat all day in every kind of weather, exposed to the elements. In addition, such peddling was illegal, and the blind man was constantly filled with fear that the authorities would harass or even arrest him. Sure enough, one day, a policeman caught him and confiscated all of his merchandise. The blind man wailed bitterly over his misfortune. B'Shaya Muscat heard his heartrending cries. The kind-hearted rabbi gave the blind pauper enough money to cover his loss. Okay. From then on, Rabbi Yeshaya would wait for the blind man every morning. The minute he set up his little stand, Rabbi Yeshaya would come by and ask him and purchase all of his wares. Every day he did this. Okay? So if you saw this, what would you ask? So the neighbors saw what was going on and asked Rabbi Yeshaya, we see that you are supporting the blind man single-handedly. So why don't you just give him one lump sum, a monthly stipend, and save him from the burden of dragging his basket and setting up his stall every morning, and save yourself the effort of going through this daily charade. Because every morning, the man sets up the shop, he buys everything, and he goes. So what are you going through? Why are you making why all this hassle? Just give him the money. So what would you answer? So Rabbi Yeshaya firmly rejected their proposal. And he said, don't you see how much pride the blind man takes in his enterprise? Don't you see how he considers himself to be a successful businessman, not a helpless beggar? If this poor man's eyesight has been taken away from him, shall we also take away from him his self-respect and sense of accomplishment? The sensitivity was that this man felt that he was an entrepreneur, that he was making a living, and he was working to make a living. He felt a sense of menschlichkeit, a sense of accomplishment, self-respect. That was a sensitivity that this man had. Because again, it's not just about the money. It's not just about getting the person the money. It's about putting thought into what you're doing and thinking about the recipient. As the Rambam says, think about not embarrassing him. Think about giving him emotional support. Think about comforting him and strengthening him. And as we see here, think about his self-respect in the sense of here the man felt he was accomplishing something, he was taking care of himself, and Rabbi Shai understood you can't take that away from him. So again, it's about making sure that it's not just giving the money, but putting thought into it. And the last thing I want to mention is the following: that again, this book, How to Fulfill the Laws of Tzedakah and Meiser, it's an art scroll book written by Rabbi Shimon Taub. So he brings down in the footnotes a very interesting thing from the Shalah. The Shalah, the sefer known as which the full name is Shnei Luchai Sabris. And the author was known by an acronym of the name of the book it was called the Shalah. So the Shalah says that there are many people who do tzedakah, who fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah, but they don't fulfill what he calls machshirei hamitzvah, which would be translated as the preliminary to the mitzvah, what helps you prepare for the mitzvah. But what I think that means here is that people have to make sure that the mitzvah is accompanied by certain things in order to do it properly. And what are the 4 things that he lists as the machshirei, the things that help you get the mitzvah done properly at its fullest level? He says 4 things. Number 1, you need to give it secretly, as we said before, because by doing that, you avoid the embarrassment to the poor. When you give it to him, and he knows it's you, with a cheerful expression, right? Both things the Rambam mentioned. The third is, which we didn't mention before, is to give him the best of your possessions. Now, if you're giving him money, typically doesn't make a difference. But if you give him food, let's say, comes to the door, you give him food. That's tzedakah. That food should be the best of your food. You're giving him clothing, it should be good quality. The proper way to do the mitzvah, to do any mitzvah, is with your highest quality things, the things that you would want for yourself in the highest quality to give to the poor, to do the mitzvah with. And here, in the sense of helping the needy, to help the needy with what is the best, which is called to give from the highest and best quality. The fourth thing that he says is really is a fascinating idea, and he writes, there are people who are too embarrassed to accept tzedakah. And therefore, a person has to figure out on his own who are the poor that need tzedakah. This is reminiscent of that fourth level, but again, it's somewhat like the fourth level of giving him before he asks. Here, the Shalah is saying there are people who will not take tzedakah; they're too embarrassed to ask, and therefore you need to use your seichel. You need to figure out who are the people that really need and make sure they get. Again, that's thinking. That means the mitzvah is not just about dispensing money; it's about putting thought into it, and in this sense, putting thought into figuring out who really needs, but they're too embarrassed to ask. So all these examples are, as I've repeated many times already, the mitzvah of tzedakah is not just about giving the money, but you have to invest thought to hold up their self-respect, to emotionally support them, to make sure if they're embarrassed to give, that you get the tzedakah to them. And if we'll put thought into our giving of tzedakah, then we'll be able to fulfill this very, very important mitzvah at great levels. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful Shabbos.
This is pasuk. This is kind of only